The form had 47 pages. I signed all of them without reading past the third. Advisor Sewell watched me do it the way you watch someone eat something you would never put in your mouth. Curious, slightly horrified, too polite to say anything. He said something anyway. "You understand what you are signing?" "I understand enough. The Survival Compact trial has a recorded fatality rate of..." I read the summary. He paused. 3 of his 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which I had already learned meant he was recalibrating. He did it a lot around me. In the 6 hours since I had arrived at the compact intake station, he had recalibrated approximately 19 times. I had counted. "My name is Yara Osai. I am 28 years old. I was born in Accra, served 8 years in the Deep Space Colonial Corps, and I am, at this particular moment in history, the only representative humanity sent to the Galactic Survival Compact intake assessment. 1 person, Earth sent 1 person. The Veth sent a delegation of 12. The Gren sent 9, plus a support team. The Sulkai arrived in a vessel the size of a small city and apparently required 3 days just to unload their documentation. I arrived with a field pack, 2 changes of clothes, and a ration bar I was still eating when Sewell introduced himself. He had not known what to make of that. He still did not know what to make of me. I could tell because he kept looking at the ration bar like it was the most confusing part of the entire situation, which, given everything, was saying something. The intake hall was enormous. Ceilings so high they disappeared into a pale, diffused light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The floor was some kind of dark material that absorbed sound. Everything felt slightly muffled, like the building itself was trying to be careful with you. The other species moved through the space with the ease of people who belonged somewhere. The Veth were tall, triple-jointed, and luminescent around the shoulders, their skin shifting between pale gold and faint green depending on their mood, which made them very easy to read once you learned the pattern. The Gren were broad and 6-limbed, with bioluminescent spines that curved up from their backs and pulsed in slow rhythms. The Sulkai were thin, almost translucent, and moved in groups of 3 with a synchronization that made it hard to tell where one ended and another began. I was the only one who needed a chair. Sewell pulled one out for me before I asked, which I appreciated more than I showed. He sat across from me with a data pad the size of a small table and began the assessment. His voice was deep and resonant, the kind of voice that filled space without trying to. "Cardiovascular system," he said, reading, "external. It is inside me. It is accessible, 1 significant wound to the chest cavity and..." "Yes. You require sleep." "Correct. Involuntary, non-negotiable, a period of complete vulnerability occurring every rotation cycle." "That is one way to describe it." He looked up. "How would you describe it?" I thought about it. "Necessary." He made a note. I watched his stylus move and tried not to think about how that note probably read. He continued down the list. Temperature regulation, external, dependent on environment and clothing. Healing rate, slow by any galactic standard, requiring weeks or months for significant tissue repair. Skeletal structure, functional but non-redundant, meaning one break in the wrong place and mobility was compromised. Pain sensitivity, high. Stress response, produces a chemical called cortisol that over time damages the very organs it is trying to protect. He read each point carefully. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The data spoke with perfect clarity. I was, by every biological metric the compact used, the least equipped organism in the building. I finished my ration bar. He watched me fold the wrapper and put it in my pocket. "You do not discard waste?" he asked. "Old habits." He made another note. I had a feeling this one was more interesting than the last. The assessment took 4 hours. Sewell was thorough, professional, and genuinely kind in the way that people are kind when they believe they are delivering bad news to someone who does not yet understand how bad it is. He showed me the trial parameters. A Class 7 hostile environment, 30 days, 4 species, 1 location, individual survival assessed independently. The planet was called Dewar, and its file contained more red-flagged hazard categories than I had ever seen in a single document. He showed me the survival records for every species that had attempted the trial. 17 species, 14 successful admissions, 3 failures. I read their biological profiles. All 3 were stronger than humans. One had a redundant respiratory system. One could survive without water for 40 days. One had a skeletal structure that could absorb impacts that would shatter steel. All 3 were gone. I did not ask how. The file did not elaborate and I did not push it. Some information sits better when you hold it at a distance. Sewell placed me in the lowest probability survival bracket. He explained this carefully, with charts. He used the word, statistically, 4 times in 2 minutes, which told me he was trying to soften something that did not soften. I looked at the charts. I looked at Dewar's atmospheric data. I looked at my own biological profile, flagged in 17 places with cautionary symbols I was beginning to recognize. Cool, I thought. I signed the final form and stood up. Sewell stood too, quickly, like he wanted to say something before I left. He was quiet for a moment. His shoulder lights shifted to a dim, uncertain blue. Sergeant Osa, he paused, Earth sent only you. Yes. Is that another pause? Is that customary? I looked at him. He was genuinely asking, not as an insult, as a question he did not have a framework for. Earth has a limited budget, I said, and a long history of sending one person into situations that probably need more. He did not know how to respond to that. I did not explain it further. I picked up my field pack. It was heavier than regulation. I had packed it myself, reorganized it twice on the transit ship, removed 3 items that felt like comfort and added 2 that felt like survival. Old habit. Kepler 9 habit specifically, though I did not think about that by name. I thought about it the way you think about weather. A thing that happened. A thing that changed the shape of how you move through the world. 11 days, different rock, same dark. I did not think about that. At the door I stopped. There was a wall panel displaying the compact seal, a circular design with 17 shapes interlocked, each one representing a species that had earned membership. 14, technically. 3 of those shapes were faded. I counted the empty spaces where new shapes would be added. One of them was going to be mine. I walked out. Behind me I heard Sewell begin a call. His voice was low, careful, and I caught only the end of it. The human signed without reviewing the mortality clause, he said. No, she did not seem, a pause. No, she did not seem afraid. The door closed. I found a bench near the transit gate and sat down. The station hummed around me, enormous and efficient and completely indifferent. Somewhere in a wing I had not visited, 12 Veth representatives were reviewing strategy documents and cross-referencing their survival data. 9 Gren were running physical assessments. The Sulkai were presumably still unloading. I ate my second-to-last ration bar and looked out at the stars through a viewport the size of a building wall. Dewar was out there, 40 million kilometers give or take, red on the navigation charts, every flag lit. I had 7 days before the trial started. I spent the first 3 in the station gym, which was designed for species considerably larger than me. I modified what I could and ignored what I could not. I ran intervals on a treadmill built for a 6-limbed creature and did not think about how ridiculous it probably looked. A Veth assessor came in on the 2nd day, watched me for 11 minutes without speaking, and left. I did not wave. On day 4, I went to the briefing. Sewell was there. The representatives from all 4 species sat at a long table and received the final parameters. Dewar's hazard list had grown by 2 categories since the intake document. The Veth delegation exchanged looks. The Gren lead representative, a broad-shouldered creature named Tessek, studied the atmospheric data with the kind of focus that meant he was running numbers. He glanced at me once. His spine pulsed a single time in a color I did not yet know how to read. I drank my water and looked at the maps. Dewar had 3 stable elevation zones. 17 recorded atmospheric anomaly events in the last decade, and one thing the briefing called, without elaboration, a chemical cascade potential. The file listed it under the category of events that exceeded standard survival modeling. I made a note of the elevation zones. I made a note of the anomaly patterns. I made a note of the word potential, and the way Sewell's shoulder lights had dimmed slightly when the presenter reached that slide. On day 5, I repacked my field kit a 3rd time. On day 6, Tessek found me in the corridor outside the briefing room. He was alone, which I had not seen before. He stood at a distance that was either polite or cautious, maybe both. "You read the atmospheric data," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. Your species has no physiological defense against a Category 4 chemical event." "No." He was quiet. His spine moved through 3 slow colors. "The Gren have 2 backup neural pathways. If one is compromised, we continue to function. That is useful. Your species has one of most things." "Yes." Another silence. He seemed to be working towards something. "Why did you come?" I looked at him. He was asking the same question Sewell had asked, in different words, for the same reason. He did not have a framework for the answer. "Someone had to," I said. "I went back to my kid." He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he walked away, and his spine was doing something I did not have a word for yet. I would learn the word later. On the morning of departure, I stood at the boarding gate with my field pack and my last 2 ration bars, and the specific quality of calm that is not the absence of knowledge, but the decision to act alongside it. Dewar waited. I boarded the transport. "Cool." The first thing Dewar did was try to take my lungs. Not metaphorically. The atmospheric pressure at ground level was 17% higher than anything my training had covered, and the moment the transport hatch opened, my body registered the difference the way a door registers being hit by a truck. My chest tightened. My vision went briefly strange around the edges. I stood in the hatch for 3 full seconds and breathed through it before stepping out. The Veth representative directly behind me noticed. I felt the shift in the air, the slight hesitation, the weight of being observed. I stepped onto Dewar and did not look back. The planet was gray-green and enormous feeling, even though the sky was low and heavy with cloud. The ground was a compressed mineral surface that looked like cooled lava but felt like old concrete under my boots. The air smelled like metal and something I could not name, something that sat at the back of the throat and reminded you it was there every 3rd breath. Not poisonous, just unfriendly. I had been on unfriendly planets. I adjusted. The 4 groups made camp separately on that first day, within visual distance of each other because the trial parameters required proximity, but far enough that we each had space. The Veth set up a structure in under an hour, something modular and precise that seemed to regulate temperature the moment it sealed. The Gren built nothing and needed nothing, their biology comfortable in Dewar's open air. The Sulkai arranged themselves in a cluster near a rock formation, and went still in a way that I eventually understood was a form of deep environmental calibration. I put up my shelter. It was a single-person field unit, military grade, rated for conditions 2 categories below what Dewar was throwing at me. I had modified it. 3 additional insulation layers, a secondary anchor system I had built from components I was not technically supposed to repurpose, and a ventilation adjustment that I had worked out on paper during the transit and hoped would translate to reality. It translated. Mostly. I ate half a ration bar, checked my kit, reviewed my water filtration system, and was asleep by the 4th hour. Day 2 was wind. Not weather event wind, Dewar's baseline wind. It came in off the mineral flats in long, low waves that were not strong enough to knock you down but persistent enough that every movement against them cost something. The Veth moved through it without adjustment. The Gren used their lower limbs as anchor points and barely seemed to notice. I leaned into it and walked, and my legs felt the difference by evening. I stretched, I ate. I noted the wind pattern in my field log. It had a rhythm. Most things on hostile planets had a rhythm if you watched long enough. Tesek passed my camp on the 2nd evening. He did not stop, but he slowed. His spine ran a long amber pulse that I had begun to associate with attention, observation, the Gren version of taking notes. I was reorganizing my kit by firelight. Small fire built low, efficient rather than comfortable. You build a fire every night, he called. Warmth and morale, I said. He considered this. The Gren do not require external warmth. I know. Is it the morale, then? I looked at the fire. It is something to look at that is not the dark. He did not respond to that. He moved on, but the amber pulse in his spine lasted longer than usual. Day 3 was where it got interesting. I came down a ridge in the early morning and misjudged a loose section of ground. My left foot went sideways, the ankle rolled hard, and I went down on my right hand trying to catch myself. The hand hit the mineral surface at the wrong angle. I felt the pop through my wrist before I felt the pain, which came a moment later and was very thorough in its information delivery. I sat on the ground for approximately 45 seconds and breathed. Then I assessed. Range of motion was reduced. Weight bearing was uncomfortable but not impossible. The wrist was not broken, which was the important thing. Sprained. Significant but manageable. I stood up. I wrapped it from my field kit, tightened the brace until the joint was stable, and continued down the ridge. This is the part that people from other species always find confusing. They see it as endurance, as toughness, as some biological gift that humans have and they do not, but that is not what it is. It is not that the pain was less, it was very much there. It was not that I had decided to be brave. Brave implies a choice between fear and action. This was just the next thing. The wrist was hurt. The day was continuing. The two facts existed alongside each other, and neither one canceled out the other. I have tried to explain this to people since then. It does not translate cleanly. On day 5, Tesek watched me reset a dislocated shoulder against a rock outcropping. I had felt it go during a climb, a wrong angle, the joint sliding out with a sensation that is impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it. I found a flat rock face. I positioned myself, I pushed. It went back. The sound it made was not pleasant. Tesek had appeared at the top of the ridge without me noticing. He was completely still. His spine was a color I had never seen on him before, a pale, cold white that I would later learn was the Gren expression for witnessing something that did not fit inside your existing understanding of the world. "You are damaged," he said. "A little. Does it register?" I looked at him. He was asking in complete seriousness. No judgment in it. Genuine inquiry, like a scientist who has found a result that conflicts with every model. "Yes," I said. "And you continue." "What else?" Not a question. He had no answer. He came down from the ridge slowly and stood at a distance that was respectful rather than cautious now. The white in his spine was fading into something warmer. He watched me finish wrapping the shoulder. "On my world," he said, "an injury of that category grounds a soldier for recovery." "I know. You do not have that option." "I have it," I said. "I just do not take it." He was quiet for a long time after that. Night 6 changed everything. It happened in the third hour of darkness. No warning. No build. One moment the air was the usual metallic cold, and the next it was something else, something chemical and fast, a shift in composition that hit the atmospheric sensors in my field kit 3 seconds before I felt it myself as a heaviness in the chest and a sharp edge behind the eyes. I was already awake, old habit. I came out of my shelter to find the Sulkai clustered on the ground, their translucent bodies gone opaque in a way I had never seen. System shut down. Chemical sensitivity, the briefing had noted. Category 4 events exceeded their biological tolerance. 40 meters away, the Veth structure had sealed itself, but I could hear through my comms unit that the temperature regulation inside had inverted. Their own biology was working against them, overcompensating for the chemical shift, generating internal heat instead of dispersing it. They needed to come out. If they came out, the chemical air was a problem. If they stayed in, the internal heat was a worse problem. The Gren were better off. Tesek and his 2 teammates were standing mobile, but the secondary neural pathway that made them resilient was misfiring in the chemical atmosphere, giving them movement but no fine coordination. They could not lift what needed lifting. They could not handle what needed handling. I got a headache. A proper, dedicated, committed headache, the kind that sets up residence behind both eyes and intends to stay. The chemical compound in the air was doing something to my body that my body did not love. My eyes watered. My throat felt compressed. Every breath was a minor negotiation. I worked through it. I pulled the Sulkai into a more sheltered position first, because they were the most vulnerable and the least able to help themselves. 3 trips. Each time, the headache registered its opinion loudly. I noted the opinion and set it aside. Then the Veth. Their structure had a manual override, which I had studied in the briefing documents because I had studied every piece of documentation I had been given. I found the release panel, worked the override, and got the seal open. They came out in a group, disoriented and overheated, and I directed them to the lee side of the nearest rock formation where the wind broke the chemical concentration. Tesek helped me with the last one. His coordination was imperfect, his movements carrying a slight delay, but he was there. We worked without speaking. That was its own kind of language. When the last Veth was settled, I sat down on the mineral ground. The headache was a living thing now. I breathed through my nose and did not rush. After a long moment, I became aware that it was quiet. Not dour quiet, which was always full of wind and low mineral sound. A different quiet, the kind that happens when several people are watching something and no one wants to be the one who breaks it. I looked up. All of them were looking at me. The Sulkai with their recovering opacity, the Veth with their shoulder-like colors doing something slow and solemn, Tesek and his team, their spines running a single long, steady gold. Nobody said anything. I pulled out my water canteen. I drank. I checked my field kit to see what had been used. I began taking mental inventory of what I had left, what the group would need, what the morning would require. Practical thoughts. The headache was still there, fine. Tesek sat down near me, not close enough to crowd, close enough to be present. He did not ask anything. I did not offer anything. We sat in the dour night with the chemical events slowly dispersing, and the stars pressing down through the low cloud, and the cold going from uncomfortable to just cold. I hummed something, barely sound, half-remembered words my grandmother had sung, a song about going home even when home was gone, about moving toward the place where warmth had been even after the warmth was gone. I did not think about why I hummed it. I just did. Tesek's spine ran amber. I stopped humming and watched the dark. It watched back. That was fine too. In the morning I found that Tesek had taken notes. He had a small recording device, compact enough to fit in his upper right palm. He did not try to hide it. When I looked at him, he met my eyes steadily. "You do not object?" he asked. "Note what you want," I said. He noted several things that morning. He noted the way I rationed my water against projected need rather than current thirst. He noted the way I checked every shelter, every person, before I checked myself. He noted that I ate the same amount as the day before, no more and no less, with the precision of someone who had done this math before and knew exactly how long it had to last. He did not ask about any of it. He wrote it down. That was the day I started understanding that being watched was not the same as being understood. He was building a vocabulary. He did not have the words yet. He was collecting the evidence first. I respected that. I went to check the water filtration system and start the morning count. 24 days left. We had been on this planet for 6 days. We had been on this planet for a long time. The 16th day started quietly, which on doer meant nothing. I was filtering water at the camp edge when Sewell's voice came through my personal comm unit. He was on the observation station, 200 kilometers above us, watching everything on sensors that I had been told were sensitive enough to read body temperature and cortisol levels from orbit. He had been calling daily, short updates, professional, but the calls had been getting slightly longer, not the information he delivered, the pauses between the information. "All biological indicators nominal for Gren and Veth representatives," he said. "Sewell Kai continue recovery from day 6 event. You are showing elevated systemic stress markers." "I know. The markers have been elevated for 9 days." "I know." A pause, that specific pause. "You are continuing to function." "That is generally the goal, yes." Another pause, longer. "Sergeant Osei, our models project." "Sewell," I said it quietly, not unkindly. "I know what your models project. Your models are using the right numbers and asking the wrong question." Silence. "I will call tomorrow," he said. "I will be here." He disconnected. I went back to the water. Later that morning, Tesek found me recalibrating my shelter's insulation layer, which had been slowly losing efficiency since day 12. He sat on a nearby rock and opened his recording device and said nothing for a while. I had learned that his silences were working silences. He was processing. "I contacted my home research institute last night," he said eventually. I waited. "I described your behavior over the first 15 days to 3 of our leading behavioral scientists. The patterns, the injury management, the resource discipline, the response on day 6. What did they say?" He was quiet for a moment. "They said that by Gren's survival modeling, you should have requested emergency extraction on day 4. Statistically, the probability of completing the trial given your biological metrics and accumulated physical stress was," he paused. "The number was not encouraging." "I know what the number is." "You knew before you came." "Yes." He looked at me. His spine ran a slow color I had learned by then. Amber gold, the thinking pulse, but underneath it something cooler, something that had been there since day 6. "Why did that not change your decision?" he asked. I finished the insulation adjustment. I tested the seal, good enough. "Because the number tells you what is probable," I said. "It does not tell you what is possible, and it definitely does not tell you what I will do regardless." He wrote that down. "My scientists called it irrational," he said. "It probably is. They meant it as a problem. I am no longer certain they are right." I looked at him. He met my eyes and held them, which for a grin was a statement, a declaration of some kind. "There is a word in our language," he said. "It describes a soldier who continues after the tactical calculation says to stop. We use it as a warning, a caution about poor judgment." He paused. "I have been trying to decide if it applies to you, and I keep arriving at the conclusion that it does not fit. The word assumes the soldier has not properly understood the calculation. You understand the calculation perfectly. You simply continue anyway, I said. Yes, his spine pulsed. We do not have a word for that. I had heard that before. Sewell had said something close to it on day one. It was becoming something of a pattern. The galaxy had a lot of words for strength. It had a lot of words for endurance. It had words for courage that mostly meant the absence of fear, which was a thing I personally did not experience and would not claim. But this, the specific thing of understanding exactly how bad it was and continuing not because you did not understand, but because the understanding and the continuing were not connected to each other in the way everyone assumed they should be. No one seemed to have a word for that. I was beginning to think that was our word, the untranslatable one, the one that lived between all their categories. Meanwhile, somewhere above us, Sewell was sitting at a monitoring station, running numbers that kept arriving at answers he did not like. He had been at that station for 16 days. He had not slept more than 5 hours in any given cycle. I did not know this at the time. I learned it later. What I knew, from the length of his calls and the quality of his pauses, was that he had started this process with a conclusion. Humanity was biologically insufficient. Admission was a formality of politeness before the inevitable, and somewhere in the last 16 days, the conclusion had stopped fitting the data. He was a scientist, an honest one, the kind that, when the data conflicts with the conclusion, changes the conclusion. He was not there yet, but he was getting somewhere. On the 17th day, something new happened on Dewar. A localized seismic event, small by any geological standard, rearranged a section of the eastern mineral flat and opened a series of ground cracks between my camp and the water source I had been using. Not impassable, just inconvenient in the particular way that Dewar specialized in, adding cost to every routine task, draining reserves that you needed for the non-routine ones. I mapped a new route, 18 minutes longer, fine. Tesek walked it with me without being asked. His spine was warm the whole way. On the 18th day, the Sulkai representative, the one I had mentally named quietly because she was the still one, the one who watched everything and said very little, came to my camp for the first time. She stood at the edge of my shelter's light and looked at me with the flat, dark eyes of her species and said, in the careful translated syllables of the compact language, "You carry the others." "We carry each other," I said. She tilted her head. "You carry more." I did not argue that. It evens out. She was quiet, then, does it? Not an argument, just a question she was leaving with me. She went back to her cluster and was still again. I thought about it for a while. On the 20th day, Sewell called and did not mention the survival models. He asked instead about the atmospheric event on day 6, about the specific decisions I had made, in which order, on what basis. I told him. He asked about the shoulder on day 5. I told him. He asked about the water rationing. I told him. He was quiet for a long time after that, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Sergeant Osai," he said finally, "when you assess a situation and the assessment concludes that the situation exceeds your physical capacity, what happens in that moment?" I thought about it seriously. He deserved a serious answer. "The assessment and the action are in different rooms," I said. "The assessment says what it says. The action happens anyway." "In different rooms," he repeated. "The assessment does not have a lock on the door." Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had a quality I had not heard in it before, careful, like someone handling something that might be fragile. "I have been asking the wrong question," he said. "Yes. I have been asking what humans can withstand." "Yes. The correct question is what humans do with what they cannot withstand." I did not answer. He already had it. He said good night and disconnected. I sat outside my shelter for a while after that, looking at the dour sky. The clouds had thinned and I could see 3 stars through the break. Cold, distant, indifferent in the way that stars have always been indifferent and always will be. I found it comforting. Other people might not, but there was something honest about things that did not pretend to care. You knew where you stood. Tesek came by and sat nearby without a word. His spine was the warm gold. He had his recorder out, but he was not writing. Sewell called, I said. I know, we are all in contact with the station. He figured something out. Tesek's spine pulsed slowly. What did he figure out? I looked at the stars. That the thing about humans is not that we are strong, I said. The thing about humans is that we have a floor, not a ceiling. Every other species you have studied has a ceiling, the point at which they stop. We have a floor, the lowest point we will go before we decide we are still here and still moving. He was very quiet. And the floor, he said slowly, has it been found in your history by your species? I thought about Kepler 9, 11 days, different rocks, same dark. Not yet, I said. He wrote that down. Day 24, Undoer arrived without a greeting. The seismic sensors I had rigged from repurposed kit components started registering anomalies at the second hour of darkness. Not the small, localized shifts we had been experiencing. Something deeper, something building in the geological structure beneath the mineral surface, with the slow, compounding patience of forces that do not hurry because they do not have to. I was awake when it started, old habit. I had the readouts up on my field display before the first surface tremor registered. The numbers were not good. The numbers were, in fact, the kind of numbers that the briefing documentation had categorized under the heading of events that exceeded standard survival modeling. I had read that heading on day 1. I had made a note of it. I had tried, in 17 days of preparation, to plan around it. There is no planning around some things. There is only what you do when they arrive. I hit my comm unit. Everyone up. Seismic event building, not small. Get clear of your structures and move to the central rock formation. Now. I was already outside when I said it. Field pack on my back, moving. The central rock formation was the only stable geological feature in our quadrant that the survey data suggested would hold through significant seismic activity. I had identified it on day 2. I had not told anyone why I kept looking at it. You do not say certain things aloud on a survival trial, because saying them makes them real in a way that costs something, and you budget carefully. The first real tremor hit while we were still moving. The ground did not shake the way earthquakes in training simulations shake. It rolled. A long, slow roll that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than rock, somewhere in the core of the thing, and the mineral surface cracked in 2 places I could see and probably more I could not. The Veth were fast, triple-jointed and light-footed. They moved across uneven ground better than anything I had ever seen move. 8 of them were at the rock formation before I was. 2 were not. Their modular structure had sealed on automated response, trapping 2 representatives inside. The seal was designed to protect them. Against anything it had been designed for, it worked perfectly. Against a rolling seismic event that shifted the ground beneath the structure's anchor points, it was a trap. The structure had tilted 18 degrees and the manual release panel was now on the underside, pressed against mineral ground. I heard them through my comm unit. The sounds they were making were not words. The sounds they were making did not need translation. I ran. The second tremor hit when I was 4 meters from the structure and knocked me sideways. I went down on one knee, caught myself on both hands, and stood up. The wrist that I had been managing since day 3 sang a sharp note of protest. I noted the protest. The ground was still moving, not dramatically, enough to make every step a calculation. I got to the structure. I got down on the ground. The manual release panel was partially visible on the underside. the gap between the tilted structure and the mineral surface approximately 30 centimeters at its widest. I got my hands in. My left hand because the right wrist was not trustworthy under load. I found the panel by feel. I pulled. The mechanism required 60 kilograms of force to engage from the standard position. From this angle, with one hand on a moving surface, it required more than that. The mechanism did not care about this. The mechanism cared only about 60 kilograms of force. I thought about Kepler-9 and I did not think about Kepler-9. It was both things at once. It was always both things at once. I pulled. There is a thing that happens in the body under sufficient load. Not dramatic, not a surge, a settling, like everything that is not essential decides to wait and everything that is essential sharpens. The pain becomes information rather than experience. The breath becomes a tool. The focus becomes very small and very clear. Pull, breathe, hold. Pull, breathe, hold. The mechanism gave on the third attempt. A sharp metal sound, and the seal broke, and the hatch released, and the two Veth came out low and fast, and one of them caught me under the arm before I had fully registered that I had gone down to one knee again. I stood up. I said, rock formation, move. We moved. The third tremor was the large one. It hit when we were 15 meters from the formation, and it hit from below. A vertical heave that cracked the mineral surface in a running line and brought down a section of the ridge to the east in a sound like everything deciding to stop at once. We ran. I cleared the formation edge on both knees. The Veth representative beside me pulled me forward, and I did not argue with the pull. We pressed against the rock, and I put my back to the stone and felt it hold, steady and enormous and completely indifferent to what was happening around it. Exactly what I had needed it to be. The tremors continued for another 40 minutes, smaller each time, the geological system releasing pressure in diminishing steps, standard cascade behavior, on paper anyway. I sat against the rock and ran inventory in my head. All 4 species accounted for. The Sulkai had reached the formation early and were in their opaque shutdown state, which I had learned was protective rather than vulnerable. The Gren were standing, mobile, Tesek running a count of his team that mirrored my own. The Veth were clustered together, shoulder lights running the pale, cold blue of stress recovery. 2 of them looked at me. I held their gaze and they held mine, and that was all that needed to happen. Tesek sat beside me, not close, present. I realized my hands were shaking, not much, enough to notice. I turned them palm down against my thighs and waited for it to pass. Adrenaline processing, normal, biological, nothing to make a note of. Tesek made a note of it. You are shaking, he said, very quietly. Yes. That is the physical response to. I know what it is. And yet earlier you. Tesek, I said his name without heat. The shaking is what happens after. It is the body doing housekeeping. It does not happen during because during does not leave room for it. He was quiet. It is not control, I said. It is sequence. The body knows the order of operations. He wrote that down. Above us, 200 kilometers up, Sewell had stopped taking notes 30 minutes ago. He had been watching the seismic data in real time, watching the survival probability calculations update every 30 seconds, watching the numbers fall through every threshold his models had. He was sitting very still. He had watched me pull that release mechanism. His sensors were good enough to read the physical data. He knew what the load was. He knew what my wrist condition was. He knew what the surface movement was beneath me while I was working. He had run the probability of successful extraction. He had watched it happen anyway. He was sitting with the specific quality of stillness that comes when you are a scientist, and the data has done something that the science said was not possible, and you are deciding, very carefully, what kind of scientist you are going to be about it. He was the honest kind. He sat there, and he accepted what he had watched. I did not know any of this until later. What I knew in the moment was that the rock was solid behind my back, the tremors were smaller, and everybody was breathing. I ate half a ration bar. Tesek watched me do it. His spine was a color I had not seen on him before, not the amber of thinking, not the gold of warmth, something between them, something that did not have a name in the standard translation matrix. He showed me the recorder display later that night when the planet had settled and we had confirmed all camps were compromised and rebuilt shelter from what was left. 6 days until the trial ended. We had enough for 6 days. Barely. Barely was enough. He had a file on the recorder. 40 days of behavioral observation, condensed into 207 notes. He showed me the most recent one. It said, after extracting VETH representatives from compromised structure under active seismic conditions and significant personal physical cost, subject ate half of a standard ration unit and spoke 4 words to the nearest representative. The 4 words were logistical, no reference to the action performed, no acknowledgement of the physical cost, no claim, as though the action and the cost and the continuation were all simply the next thing, the next and the next and the next. I do not have a framework for this. I am beginning to think that is the correct response to this species, not to build a new framework, to accept that the existing ones do not apply. I read it twice. You can keep that, I said. He turned the recorder off and put it away. We sat together in the rebuilt shelter with the dour wind outside and 6 days left, and a planet that had used everything it had and not finished us. We have had worse, I said. He looked at me, have you? I thought about the dark, the 11 days of it, different rocks, same math. Yes, I said. He did not ask what. He was a good scientist. He knew when to let something sit. The ceremony was held in the main hall of the compact station, and it was, by every available measure, enormous. I showed up with my arm in a support wrap, and a ration bar in my jacket pocket, and the specific feeling of someone who has been somewhere that required everything, and is now being asked to stand still in a large room with good lighting. The hall had been designed for occasions exactly like this one, ceilings that reached into the kind of distance that makes you aware of your own size, light sources distributed in a way that managed to feel both ceremonial and warm. Representatives from every compact member species arranged in tiers along the walls, their biological light sources and sound frequencies, creating a layered, resonant atmosphere that would have been overwhelming if I had not spent 30 days on a planet that specialized in overwhelming and taught me to operate inside it. I found my assigned position and stood there. Tesek was to my left. His spine was running a long, steady gold. He had been like that since the transport back up to the station. I had stopped asking him about his spine colors because he had started explaining them before I asked, which was its own kind of communication. The VETH delegation was to my right, 12 of them arranged with the precise, considered spacing of a species that understood ceremony as a functional language. The 2 I had pulled from the structure on day 24 were in the front row. They had not said much to me since then. They did not need to. The Sulkai were behind me, arranged in their cluster formation, opaque and still. I had come to understand that their stillness was not absence. It was attention at a level I did not have organs for. Sul came to the speaking platform, and the hall went quiet the way it goes quiet when something is genuinely expected. The frequency shifts were immediate and collective. I felt it in the floor through my boots. He stood for a moment before he spoke. He had been on the observation station for 30 days, and I expected him to look tired. He looked, instead, like someone who had decided something. The quality of certainty was different from rest, but it was not nothing. He spoke for a long time. I caught approximately half of it through my translator, which was functioning at the usual rate of slightly imperfect but sufficient. The half I caught came through in fragments and full sentences alternating, which was enough to follow the shape of it. He talked about the compact's founding principles, biological fitness as the standard for membership, which he described without apology because it was not wrong in the way he had once thought it was wrong. He talked about what fitness had meant, and what the trial was designed to measure, and what it had been measuring for decades. Then he talked about the 30 days on Dewar. He did not dramatize it. He gave data. He gave the numbers from his observation station in the precise language of a scientist who is using accuracy as its own form of tribute. Seismic event on day 24. Survival probability calculation at its lowest point. The specific sequence of actions taken by the human representative. He let the numbers speak. Then he said the thing. He said it quietly, without emphasis, the way people say the things they have been working toward for a long time and have finally gotten right. I caught most of it. The translator ran behind him in my earpiece, steady and partial, and what I got was this, that the compact had built its membership criteria on the assumption that survival was a function of biological advantage, that this assumption was correct for every species that had ever applied, that the trial on Dewar had produced a result the models could not account for, not because the models were wrong, but because they were asking a question the human representative was not answering. The question was, how much can this species withstand? The correct question, the one the last 30 days had demonstrated, was, what does this species do with the things it cannot withstand? He paused. The answer, he said, was that it continues, without optimization, without elegance, carrying the damage with it and operating anyway, that this was not strength in any category the compact had previously defined, that it was, in fact, something the compact did not have a word for, that they were creating one. The hall held a frequency silence that I felt rather than heard. Then Tesek leaned over to me. "You are not listening," he said. "I am listening. Your face is doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing it does when you are somewhere that is not here." I looked at him. His spine was warm and I knew that color by now. I had known it for weeks. "Day 24, I said. He did not ask. He had all his notes. He knew exactly what day 24 had been. "We have had worse," I said. He was quiet for a moment. His spine ran a slow gold pulse. "Have you?" he asked. "Yes." "And you are still here." "And I am still here." The hall was still holding its frequency. Sewell was still speaking. Around us, the representatives of 17 species were witnessing something that apparently required witnessing, and I was standing in the middle of it with a wrapped arm and half a ration bar in my pocket, and the specific sensation of someone who has been told a thing is impossible enough times that the impossibility has stopped registering. I had been told at intake that my survival probability was in the lowest bracket. I had been told by Sewell's models that the Day 6 event exceeded my biological tolerance. I had been told, implicitly and explicitly, by every piece of data and every biological assessment and every cautious, careful, genuinely kind communication from the people around me, that I was not built for this. They were not wrong. I was not built for it. I had done it anyway. That was not the same as being built for it. That was the other thing. The thing without a word, the floor instead of the ceiling, the room where the assessment lives and the different room where the action happens and the door between them that does not have a lock. After the ceremony, after the formal admission proceedings, after the symbol for humanity was added to the compact seal in a small, private edition that Sewell performed himself, I found a viewport on the outer ring of the station. It was a wide viewport, looking out toward nothing in particular, just deep space, the specific shade of dark that exists between everything and reminds you of the distances involved. I stood there for a while. I heard him before I saw him, the cathedral resonance of his voice, the soft, careful weight of it. Sergeant Osai. Sewell. He came and stood beside me. Not close. Present. He had learned something from Tesek, maybe, or from 30 days of watching what presence looked like when it was offered correctly. We looked at the dark together for a moment. I owe you an acknowledgement, he said. You do not. I assessed you at intake as the lowest probability candidate in the trial's recorded history. That assessment was accurate. It was, he said, and it was completely insufficient. I did not answer. The question I was asking, he said, was built on the wrong assumption. I was measuring capacity, maximum load before failure. Every species we have ever admitted has a ceiling, a point at which the biological system stops. I spent 30 days waiting for yours. It has not appeared yet. No, a pause. The quality of the pause was different from his day one pauses. I have revised my model. The human biological system does not have a ceiling in the way I was measuring. It has a floor, a point below which it will not go. And unlike the ceilings of other species, which can be identified in advance from biological data, your floor has never been found, I said. Yes. We were both quiet. I wanted to ask you something, he said. I have wanted to ask since day 6, on the night of the atmospheric event, when our sensors registered that you were in significant biological distress. You were humming. I did not respond immediately. Our audio sensors captured fragments. The tone suggested memory, association. He paused. What was it? I looked at the dark between stars. A song my grandmother sang, I said. I do not remember all of it. What is it about? I thought about this seriously. The honest answer was that it was about several things, the way songs from old people are about several things at once, and that most of them were not easily translated into compact language. But the center of it, the core. Going home, I said, even when home is gone. The song says you keep going toward where it was, where the warmth was. Even after the warmth is gone, you just keep moving in that direction. Sewell was quiet for a long time. The dark between stars did not change. It was good at that. That is, he said slowly, the most human thing I have heard in 30 days of observing humans. I reached into my jacket pocket, my last ration bar. I had been saving it without knowing why, which is the kind of saving that has meaning you find later. I ate it. Noted, I said. Sewell made a sound. I had not heard this particular sound from him before. Low, resonant, slightly unsteady at the edge. The Veth equivalent, I learned much later, of a laugh that knows it is not really a laugh. The sound of someone who has found something that lands in the space between funny and profound, and has decided to let it sit there exactly where it is. We stood at the viewport for a while longer. Tesek appeared at some point. I heard his footsteps, the slightly asymmetric rhythm of 6 limbs at rest, and then he was on my other side. He had his recorder out. He was not writing, he just held it. The Sulkai representative came too. Quietly, which was the only way she came anywhere. She arranged herself at the edge of the group and was still, which was her version of being present, which I had come to understand was no small thing. 4 species at a viewport, looking at nothing in particular. After a while Tesek said, "Where is home for you?" "Akram," I said. "Is it far?" I looked at the dark, the distances involved, the specific shade of space that exists between everything. "Not in the direction that matters," I said. He wrote that down. I let him. On the transport back toward Earth, I had a 6-day journey and a bunk that was slightly too short and a field log with 30 days of entries that I reread once and then closed. The entries were accurate. They were also not the story, the way a medical chart is accurate about a person and also completely misses what the person is. The story was in the things I had not written down. The sound of the dark on night 6. The weight of the release mechanism under my left hand. The way Tessek's spine ran gold in the morning light on day 16, and I had understood without being told that something between us had shifted from professional to something that did not have a category in either of our languages. The way Sewell's voice had changed between day 1 and day 30. The ration bar. The song. I lay on the too-short bunk and looked at the ceiling, and let the transport carry me in the direction of where warmth was. 6 days. Fine. I closed my eyes. Old habit.